Hello, welcome to the Purple Planet, where we help you drift into dreamland with the timeless and historical tales of queens, empresses, priestesses, and warriors from across the ages. As you begin to relax and your eyes grow heavier, allow yourself to drift backward through the hush of centuries, through the gentle folds of time. Let the world around you soften, shadows growing longer, as a quiet evening settles over your thoughts. The mists of 11th century Italy swirl around a figure both formidable and enigmatic, Matilda of Tuscany. In an age where power was measured in swords and souls, and the lines between throne and altar blurred, she rose, against all odds, to become a force that shaped the destinies of emperors and popes alike. Known variously as the Margravine of Tuscany, countess, military leader, and steadfast papal ally, Matilda's life defied the narrow scripts written for women of her time. Her world was one of shifting allegiances and relentless conflict, where the ambitions of men regularly redrew maps and overturned kingdoms. The Italian peninsula, fractured into a mosaic of rival city-states and lordly domains, became both battleground and chessboard in the escalating struggle between the papacy and the Holy Roman Empire, a struggle historians now call the Investiture Controversy. At its heart lay a single incendiary question: who held the authority to appoint bishops and thus wield the spiritual and temporal power that came with them, the emperor or the pope? In this crucible, Matilda emerged as a singular figure. She was as comfortable riding at the head of an army as she was presiding over councils of bishops and abbots. Her castles, stone sentinels perched atop the Apennines, became sanctuaries for exiled clergy and rallying points for the church's reformers. To her supporters, she was a living shield for the papal cause. To her enemies, an implacable foe whose loyalty to Rome was unbreakable. Yet Matilda was more than a warrior. She was a woman of profound faith and subtle diplomacy, whose intelligence and charisma inspired fierce devotion. Her story is a tapestry woven of battle and prayer, strategy and sacrifice. A narrative that reveals not only the tumult of her era, but the extraordinary possibility of female power in a world that rarely allowed it. As we trace her journey from daughter of Tuscan nobility to the great countess who would change the course of European history, we enter a realm where legend and fact entwine. Matilda's life remains a testament to the enduring power of conviction and a reminder that history is sometimes made not by those who inherit power, but by those who seize it. Matilda entered the world in 1046, the youngest child and only surviving daughter of Boniface, the third of Tuscany, and Beatrice of Lorraine. She was born into a dynasty whose lands sprawled across northern and central Italy. A patchwork of fertile valleys, forested hills, and fortified towns stretching from the Apennines to the Po River. The House of Canossa, as her family's line was known, was among the most powerful in the region, rivaled only by the emperor himself. Their wealth, derived from tolls, agriculture, and strategic marriages, was surpassed only by their web of alliances, stretching from Rome to the imperial courts of Germany. The splendor of Matilda's early years was shadowed by violence. In 1052, when Matilda was still a child, her father Boniface was assassinated under mysterious circumstances, struck down while hunting, his killers never identified. With his death, the family's future teetered on a knife's edge. Beatrice, Matilda's formidable mother, swiftly assumed the regency, refusing to cede control of the vast Canossa inheritance or its influence over the church. The world Matilda inherited was one where power was as much a matter of survival as of a birthright. Beatrice shielded her daughter from the storm, but also prepared her for it. The court of Canossa became a school of statecraft. Matilda's education was unusually broad for a noblewoman. She learned the Latin of the church, the rhetoric of diplomacy, and the tactics of command, alongside a deep-rooted faith that would anchor her life. Surrounded by abbots, knights, and envoys, she absorbed lessons in both scripture and swordplay. Her childhood shaped by the presence of danger and the demands of leadership. The family's fortunes were closely tied to the currents of imperial and ecclesiastical power. Beatrice herself was a granddaughter of the Holy Roman Emperor. Her marriage to Boniface had fused two lines of immense prestige, but also entangled them in the rivalries that defined the era. After Boniface's death, Beatrice made a bold, controversial choice. She wed Godfrey the Bearded, Duke of Lower Lorraine, a powerful ally of the reformist papacy, and a man with his own tangled web of loyalties. This alliance would prove both shield and sword, offering protection from imperial ambitions, but drawing the Canossa family deeper into the contests that would soon engulf all of Italy. Through these years, Matilda's character emerged, fiercely intelligent, devout, and keenly aware of her destiny. While other noble daughters were trained for marriage and piety, she was being groomed for command. She rode with the men of her household, learned the art of negotiation at her mother's side, and was entrusted with the secrets of the court. The values of her lineage, loyalty to the church, devotion to family, and the necessity of strength became her own. By the time Matilda reached adolescence, she was no ordinary heiress. She stood at the crossroads of empires, a living link between the old world of feudal lords and the rising tide of papal authority. The tragedies and ambitions of her childhood forged in her a will that would soon be tested on the stage of history. As Matilda approached adulthood, the machinery of dynastic politics turned its attention to her future. In the medieval world, marriage was rarely a matter of the heart, especially for a woman destined to inherit vast territories. Around 1069, Matilda's hand was given to Godfrey the Hunchback, her stepbrother and cousin, the son of her mother's second husband, Godfrey the Bearded. The union was an intricate knot of bloodlines and ambitions, designed to cement alliances between the powerful houses of Canossa and Lorraine. The marriage, though politically astute, proved deeply troubled. Godfrey, a man marked by both physical deformity and a reputation for ruthlessness, found little common ground with his fiercely independent wife. Their personalities clashed, and the physical distance between their domains, he ruled in the north, she in Tuscany, mirrored the emotional gulf that soon widened between them. Contemporary chroniclers hint at a union more symbolic than conjugal, with Matilda often residing apart from her husband, commanding her lands and courts as her own sovereign. Yet, the political stakes remained high. In an era when the ownership of estates and castles could determine the fate of kingdoms, Matilda's marriage was watched closely by both imperial and papal factions. The Canossa lands, rich and strategically vital, were coveted by emperors and churchmen alike. Whether by design or circumstance, Matilda's separation from Godfrey only heightened her own authority. When Godfrey was assassinated in 1076, struck down while relieving himself, in a death both ignoble and mysterious, Matilda was left unencumbered, the sole mistress of her inheritance. Her return to Tuscany marked a turning point. No longer a pawn in others' games, Matilda assumed full control over her domains. Her rule was not passive. She convened councils, dispensed justice, and commanded the loyalty of vassals and churchmen. Rumors swirled about her private life. Some whispered of secret lovers. Others, in later centuries, spun tales of romantic entanglement with Pope Gregory VII himself. These stories, though lacking real evidence, only added to her legend, painting her as a woman who refused to be defined by the limits of her gender or the conventions of her time. With her marriage behind her, Matilda stood uniquely positioned, a woman with the authority of a prince, the independence of a sovereign, and the loyalty of both nobles and clerics. The stage was set for her decisive role in the greatest conflict of her century, a struggle that would pit emperor against pope and forever change the landscape of medieval Europe. The 11th century's central drama was not merely played out in the halls of emperors or the sanctuaries of great cathedrals. It unfolded on the very battlements and mountain passes overseen by Matilda of Tuscany. As the papacy, under the reforming Pope Gregory VII, clashed with Emperor Henry IV over who wielded the right to appoint bishops, Matilda became both shield and sword for the Church's cause. The Investiture Controversy was more than a theological debate. It was a battle for supremacy between two universal powers, the spiritual authority of Rome and the temporal might of the Holy Roman Empire. Bishops were more than shepherds of souls. They were princes, wielding land, castles, and armies. To control their appointment was to control the machinery of medieval society. When Pope Gregory VII issued his bold decrees stripping emperors of the right to invest bishops with ring and staff, the empire erupted in fury. Henry IV saw the Pope's challenge as rebellion. Gregory saw imperial interference as a sin against God's order. Into this storm stepped Matilda. Her loyalty to Gregory VII was unyielding, forged by shared ideals and personal conviction. She opened her castles, most famously the mighty fortress of Canossa, to the Pope and his exiled allies. Her resources underwrote the papal cause. She provided not only gold and grain, but also the logistical support needed to sustain armies and wage campaigns on the Pope's behalf. Her domains became a refuge for reformers and a launching pad for resistance against imperial incursion. The drama reached its zenith in the winter of 1077 at Matilda's castle of Canossa. Driven by rebellion among his own German princes and desperate for absolution, Henry IV crossed the Alps amid snow and ice, seeking forgiveness from Gregory VII. For 3 days, the emperor waited barefoot in the freezing cold outside the castle gates, a spectacle of penance, witnessed and orchestrated in part by Matilda herself. The image of the humbled emperor shivering in the snow while Matilda and the Pope deliberated within became an enduring symbol of papal authority, triumphant over secular power. Yet Matilda's role was more than that of host or intermediary. The fortress at Canossa existed because of her vision and resources, a testament to her strategic mind and resolve. She stood beside Gregory VII, not merely as a supporter, but as a partner, her authority recognized by popes and princes alike. Chroniclers marveled at her presence at councils, her command of armies, her unwavering stance in the face of excommunication and war. Such leadership was astonishing in an age when women were expected to rule only from behind the veil of piety or the walls of a nunnery. Matilda defied these limitations, riding at the head of her troops, negotiating with bishops, and shaping the course of history. Her court became a center for the new reformist ideals, attracting scholars, clerics, and artists, and radiating influence far beyond the borders of Tuscany. Matilda's alliance with the papacy endured through trial and triumph. When Gregory VII was forced into exile, she sheltered him. When the emperor's armies invaded, she rallied resistance. Through siege and intrigue, through victory and defeat, Matilda's loyalty to the church never wavered. In her, the papal cause found not only its most steadfast defender, but its most formidable general. Her legacy in the Investiture Controversy is not measured only in battles won or castles held, but in the very redefinition of female power. Matilda's life became a living argument for the capacity of women to shape history, not behind the scenes, but on the main stage, in full command of the forces that would decide the fate of Christendom. Matilda's reputation as a warrior countess was not born of legend alone. It was forged on the field. In the turbulent decades that followed Canossa, Italy became a patchwork of battlegrounds, and Matilda was almost everywhere at the heart of the fight. While her contemporaries, male lords and margraves, often underestimated her, Matilda rose above the conventions of her gender, donning armor and commanding troops in person. Her strategy was shaped by the geography of her domains. The Apennine ridges, dense forests, and rivers became natural barriers, and Matilda transformed them into formidable lines of defense. Castles such as Canossa, Carpinetti, and Bianello were not simply seats of power. They were nerve centers for military operations. Matilda fortified towns, stockpiled resources, and ensured that her armies could move swiftly across the landscape, outmaneuvering imperial forces at every turn. One of her most celebrated victories came at the Battle of Sorbara in 1084. Imperial troops sent by Henry IV to reassert control over the rebellious north found themselves routed by Matilda's forces, led with a blend of tactical ingenuity and unyielding resolve. Chroniclers marveled at a woman who could rally knights, negotiate alliances, and outthink generals who had spent lifetimes at war. This was not the only occasion. Again and again, Matilda resisted imperial sieges, coordinated with papal allies, and orchestrated defenses that frustrated even the most determined adversaries. Her court in Tuscany flourished as a beacon of resistance and culture. It became a place where exiled bishops and wandering scholars mingled with diplomats, poets, and knights. The air was thick with debate and strategy, and the pulse of reformist energy ran through every gathering. Matilda hosted synods and councils, lending her support to church reformers and ensuring her lands remained sanctuaries for the persecuted. Her hospitality was legendary, but so was her discipline. She expected fealty and competence from those who served her cause. Through all these trials, Matilda's faith remained her North Star. She endowed monasteries, rebuilt churches damaged by war, and supported the spread of new monastic movements. Her patronage extended beyond mere charity. It was a conscious effort to knit together a network of spiritual and political alliances, fortifying the Church's position in Italy. Stories of her generosity and piety spread, and she became a living legend, celebrated in hagiographies, sung about by troubadours, and invoked in prayers by those who saw in her not just a noblewoman, but a champion of the righteous. Yet the battles took their toll. The decades of war left scars on both the land and Matilda herself. She witnessed the devastation of villages, the suffering of her people, and the ever-present specter of betrayal from within her own ranks. But her resolve did not falter. Even as imperial armies returned again and again, Matilda adapted, rebuilding, rearming, and inspiring her followers to endure. By the dawn of the 12th century, Matilda stood as a symbol, a rare convergence of courage, faith, and strategic brilliance. Her legend grew not just from her victories, but from her resilience, her ability to turn adversity into strength, and her unwavering commitment to a cause greater than herself. In the tapestry of medieval resistance, her thread was not only the most vibrant, but also the most enduring. As the century turned and the storms of battle began to ebb, Matilda's life entered a new phase, one shaped less by the clamor of arms than by the quiet maneuvering of diplomacy and the steady work of consolidation. The warrior countess, now a seasoned and revered figure, began to shift her focus from the battlefield to the long game of legacy. In 1089, in a move that stunned Italian and German courts alike, Matilda married again. Her new husband, Welf V of Bavaria, was 2 decades her junior, a political match designed to knit together 2 great houses in the ongoing struggle against imperial power. The marriage, by most accounts, was never fully consummated and soon unraveled, with Welf returning to Germany and Matilda resuming her solitary rule. Yet the alliance had served its purpose. It provided the papal cause with crucial support in the north and further isolated Henry IV. For Matilda, the episode underscored a lifelong pattern, using the tools of her era's politics to serve a vision that transcended personal fulfillment. With age, Matilda withdrew from active military life, but her influence remained undiminished. She continued to arbitrate disputes, oversee her estates, and serve as a linchpin for the papal party in Italy. Her patronage of religious institutions reached its zenith in these years. She endowed abbeys, rebuilt war-torn churches, and invited scholars and theologians to her court. Her lands became known as sanctuaries for reformers and visionaries, a patchwork of security in an uncertain world. The most consequential act of her later years was the so-called donation of Matilda. In a series of legal maneuvers and formal declarations, she transferred her extensive territories, including castles, towns, and rich agricultural estates, to the papacy. This gift was unprecedented, vastly increasing the Church's temporal power and setting the stage for the rise of the Papal States. The donation was both an act of faith and a calculated political move, ensuring that her life's work, the defense and empowerment of the Church, would endure beyond her death. Matilda's final years were marked by both serenity and sorrow. She saw old friends, bishops, abbots, knights, pass from the scene. She suffered periods of illness, but remained a commanding presence until the end. When she died in 1115, the news sent shockwaves through Italy and beyond. Her lands, now formally in papal hands, became the subject of bitter contestation among emperors, popes, and local lords. The vacuum she left was not merely territorial, but spiritual, a sense that an era had ended with her passing. Yet her story did not conclude with death. Matilda's legend grew in the telling. Popes and emperors alike laid claim to her memory, seeking to cloak themselves in her legacy. In an extraordinary posthumous tribute, her remains were eventually moved to St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, an honor almost never accorded to a laywoman. Her tomb became a site of pilgrimage, her name invoked in prayers and chronicles, as both a saintly protector and a political paragon. Matilda's donation, her battles, and her unwavering faith shaped the destiny of both church and empire. But it was her singular presence, a woman who moved kings and popes, who commanded armies and counseled saints, that ensured her place among the immortals of medieval history. With Matilda's death, fact and legend began to intermingle with new vigor. For centuries, stories about the great countess have flickered at the edge of history and myth, inviting speculation, reinterpretation, and admiration in equal measure. No tale has proven more persistent or more irresistible than that of Matilda's supposed romance with Pope Gregory VII. Chroniclers and later storytellers, unable to imagine so intense a partnership between man and woman, as anything but romantic, spun tales of secret meetings and whispered affections between the warrior countess and the reforming pope. Yet, despite the allure of these rumors, there is no historical proof, only the fertile imagination of an age that struggled to understand a bond forged in shared ideals rather than passion. If anything, the intensity of their alliance reveals a different kind of intimacy. The loyalty of two visionaries, united by faith and purpose, whose partnership altered the map of Europe. Beyond romance, Matilda's legend grew as a symbol of piety, resilience, and feminine authority. In an age when women were expected to wield influence from behind the scenes, Matilda stood in full view. She became a model for female rulers and a beacon for those seeking to reconcile spiritual devotion with worldly power. Chroniclers marveled at her ability to command loyalty from hardened knights and learned abbots alike. Her name became a touchstone for discussions of women's capacity for leadership, courage, and wisdom. Her cultural impact did not end with her contemporaries. Dante Alighieri, writing 2 centuries after her death, famously placed Matilda in his Divine Comedy. In the Purgatorio, she appears as a radiant, guiding figure on the banks of the earthly paradise, a symbol of active virtue and spiritual grace. Scholars have debated her precise meaning in Dante's vision, but her inclusion alone testifies to the enduring hold she maintained on the Italian imagination. Over the centuries, Matilda's story has been retold in chronicles, poems, plays, and paintings. She is remembered as much for her faith and generosity as for her military genius. Pilgrims venerated her tomb, reformers invoked her name, and in the halls of power, her example was both celebrated and feared. In Italy and beyond, she became a figure not only of medieval history, but of timeless inspiration, a woman who navigated the violence and intrigue of her era with an iron will and a compassionate heart. Matilda's cultural legacy is, at its core, a testament to possibility. She shattered expectations, transcended boundaries, and left behind a legacy that continued to challenge and inspire. Her myth, like her life, is inseparable from the history of the Church, the Empire, and the ongoing conversation about what women can achieve when given power and when they seize it for themselves. In the long shadow of medieval Europe, Matilda of Tuscany stands as a singular and luminous figure. Warrior and diplomat, patron and reformer, she traversed boundaries that hemmed in most women of her era, and indeed many men. Her life unfolded at the crossroads of faith and power, where the ambitions of popes and emperors collided, and where the fate of kingdoms could hinge on the resolve of a single, determined soul. Matilda's world was one of relentless uncertainty. She faced invasions, betrayals, shifting alliances, and the ceaseless scrutiny of those who doubted a woman could command armies or shape the course of Christendom. Yet, time and again, she proved her doubters wrong. She led troops through the mud and fog of northern Italy, presided over courts teeming with intrigue, and acted as the anchor for a church struggling to define its independence. Her castles were not only strongholds of stone, but sanctuaries of conviction, where courage was as valued as piety. She was, above all, a master of adaptation. Through the turbulence of her marriages, the heartbreak of loss, and the exhaustion of endless campaigns, she never lost sight of her purpose. Her faith, both personal and institutional, guided her. Yet she was no mere zealot, but a strategist who understood the levers of power and the necessity of compromise. In an age that expected women to be silent, Matilda's voice resounded from the Apennines to Rome. Her legacy endures not simply in the lands she donated or the castles she fortified, but in the idea she embodied that greatness is not reserved for the expected or the conventional. In life and legend, Matilda became a touchstone for ambition, loyalty, and the transformative potential of female leadership. Her story is a reminder that the boundaries of the possible are drawn anew by those bold enough to cross them. More than 9 centuries after her death, Matilda's spirit lingers in the stones of Canossa, in the verses of Dante, and in the halls of St. Peter's Basilica, where her tomb stands as a silent testament. She remains, for all who seek to understand the power of conviction and the legacy of courage, a figure as vital and compelling as the age she helped to shape. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life of Matilda of Tuscany. We wish you sweet dreams